Greetings and welcome to another episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s. I am your host Scott, and this is my co-host Caleb. Caleb, good to see you. How are you doing?
Doing great.
Great. Hey, we are back again to talk about the experience growing up as youth group kids in the 90s and how that has shaped our adult lives. We'll talk to old friends about their faith journeys spanning from the 90s to today and discuss current cultural topics through the lens of someone who grew up during that era. Caleb, we don't have a guest today, unfortunately, but we figured we'd talk about a topic that will probably, make us laugh a little bit and maybe cause you to edit the episode more. What are we talking about today?
Yeah, I just realized that this episode is just a lot of work for me to edit.
Mm-hmm.
No fun.
Yeah, yeah.
We thought it'd be fun or interesting or a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B to talk about swearing.
And maybe we try to not swear at all in this episode. And
Let's
then you want
do
to
it.
edit. It's chunky. You blew it.
Oh,
You. Uh, Gee, I can never rely on you to take this seriously. No, look, swearing was something that goes through the road that we're traveling on from 90s youth group into how we parent and all those sorts of things. So it's a pretty interesting conversation.
yeah, and it definitely has. I mean, I know I have. I mean, just joking aside in what I just did, like I think it's changed for us too, and like
Yeah.
family of origin to now, it's just it is an interesting look at how we view a lot of things. Still fairly funny,
Hmm.
potentially funny conversation piece.
And I think it continues to remain, for some people, an indicator of how serious one might be in their faith, and that's just not really where either of us are at anymore. I would assume, and it's but also too, as you parent, you don't want to be just like throwing any word around it at any time.
Right. Yep. Hi, this is Caleb, the producer of the show, just breaking in like I do every episode to remind everyone that the views and opinions expressed on this show may not actually be held or even approved of by everyone appearing on this episode. One of the goals of this show is to give everyone a safe space to share their opinions and thoughts on deeply personal matters of faith. We are not looking to start an argument, but instead let people share how they feel. We also know that our memories of events that happened 25 to 30 years ago may not be 100% accurate. We assume everyone's best intentions as they share how they remembered the experience of their youth. Now, back to the show.
So as a intro, I'll tell you a quick story about how I used to view this topic. So we've established that we were both really into 90s youth group culture. We were both leaders in
Yeah.
90s youth group culture, and so we were. It's very heavy emphasis on being set apart, and one of the ways that I identified with it, and I can't remember a specific teaching that convicted me of it, but I was very much like I'm not going to swear at all,
Hmm.
and I'm going to make sure that my words are clean, and that's going to set me apart from other people. Okay, maybe not.
Yeah.
So early on in my relationship with my wife, we were still friends. We weren't dating yet. I don't believe. We got word that there was this church starting up in the cities, and we went to a college about 45 minutes south of the city. So we decided to go up. It might have been a Saturday night thing. I can't exactly remember, but we
Hmm.
wanted to get people in. We thought, oh, let's get this group and go check it out. And you mentioned the name of it on another podcast, and I think your church came from that church. What was it
They're
called?
connected probably if
Yeah.
we're talking about The Rock.
Yes, I'm pretty sure it was The Rock.
Okay.
We got like matchbooks or something. I don't even know how I remember. Anyway, we thought, oh, this will be cool. I don't even know where it was, but we were attending the service, and in the middle of the sermon, the pastor was telling a story about, I don't know, him talking through maybe a counseling session or something, and the wife called the husband a son of a bitch, and he said those words, and he said them out loud, and I was like, I just, I was so angry. I
Hmm.
was so angry that a pastor from a pulpit would say that word, even in communicating the story that was effective to his point. I don't know if he said it again. I don't know if he swore again. I don't know. I'll
Hmm.
remember, and if we ever have our wives on, maybe Kate will talk about this. On the way home, like 45 minutes, it's her, and for some reason she's still interested in me after this. And like a friend who kind of, I don't even, maybe she was a Christian, maybe she wasn't. I can't even remember, but there was a
Hmm.
chance like we had invited her, and I'm in like the whole ride home. I'm just, this is why you shouldn't swear. That guy was wrong. That was a poor example of a Christian, blah, 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 blah. And I just went off. And so I had kind of dedicated myself to
Hmm.
not saying bad words. I was super convicted about it. In my brain, that was a huge indicator for me is whether if you're a Christian, you shouldn't be doing that.
Wow. I don't know if I ever knew it was that strong for you.
It
That's
was
crazy.
very strong for definitely out of high school and even into all probably throughout college
Hmm.
almost.
From your family of origin, was there rules about language that were passed down to you?
Yeah. I mean, it was implied that we wouldn't be foul-mouthed. My parents certainly didn't swear very much when we were kids. They do a little bit more now.
You've
We,
outed them.
yeah. Oh, sorry, mom and dad. They're not listening. They don't care about this. But I think we mentioned in another episode that my parents were gonna. I asked for Guns N' Roses "Use Your Illusion" 1 and 2, and they got
Yeah.
me Mr. Big instead because of the lyrics. Mr. Big.
We're saving that for the music episode. We're
Oh,
going to
sorry.
break down Mr. Big.
Yeah,
No.
they're talking about one hit wonder, but that's kind of what I always go back to is they
Okay.
didn't want a lot of dirty music in the household.
Okay. I mentioned before a CD situation, and I don't know if it'll be before or after this episode, but I do remember push to the other extreme. I was not allowed to say sucks because
Oh my
that
gosh.
was too inflammatory. So that was like a no no. I don't know if like I never got like grounded or punished for it, but my parents didn't want me even saying that. So there were rules in my household about strict language and what is appropriate and not appropriate, which
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying wrong or right, but that is
Mm-hmm.
the my house of origin, family of origin. That was one of the rules.
This is a real like specific, but I think that transition from like this stinks to this sucks is something that happened in our lifetime. And I do
Mm,
remember some people that I was friends with in college being like, I don't like that. I think that's inappropriate. And I was like,
mm.
I thought about it and I was like, sucks to be you. But but no, I didn't say that. But they were very that was a very point of conviction for them.
Mm. Yeah,
So that phrase became popular when we were, you know, 18, 19, 20.
I think so. I think you're right. That's when that phrase there's even like a weird wrestling connection to that, right? Like
Huh?
total tangent of because there was a wrestling group, Degeneration X, who started using that as like a phrase. So
Okay.
that popularized it in some form of mainstream culture. So
Hmm. Well, do you remember your parents ever using any biblical examples or verses to tell you this is why you shouldn't swear?
no, that definitely it was just this is not what we're gonna do. But we never got biblical on it. I don't think I fought it a ton in high school and even into college. I don't know if we just didn't have that conversation where it went that level of it. It was just don't do it.
Hmm.
And maybe they did, maybe they had examples, but I think it was just a passed down from their parents sort of thing. I think is kind of where what it was at the
Sure.
time.
Probably the same. Yeah, that was a generational expectation.
Yeah, for sure.
Did you end up breaking that a lot? Because I honestly didn't. I was like, I was pretty clean. I was super, like we talked about, super convicted about it.
I did not in high school or college. I think I was pretty clean
Hmm.
words using. I think it's post college when I definitely started to expand musically, and that probably was some of the music I started listening to was much more non-Christian. So that probably was a bit of a shift for me, but I don't know cuz at well, no spoilers, but we'll get there. I'm much more comfortable with it now, and that's a much more recent thing for me, probably. So it was probably still not until I was married. Even when I was getting married, I think I was still pretty clean. That was 2007, 8.
Hmm.
I'm gonna make the assumption here, Scott. I mean, I don't know you too well. You've changed from that opinion a little bit, and we'll get into maybe later. But like, do you know when that transition started happening? Because I feel like you were later to it than me, which doesn't seem right. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm different. Um, no, I sorry everyone. We knew this would get goofy a little bit. I think it was just getting into the real world and being like, this is not as offensive as it seems.
Sure.
Also, I was in seminary and starting to learn about some of these verses. So, you read through a lot of the verses about your tongue and controlling your tongue, cursing someone, keeping a
Yeah.
clean mouth, that sort of thing. And yes, that is certainly true. We should all control our tongues and that sort of stuff. However, I came to realize that my opinion changed too.
Hmm.
It doesn't need to be the words themselves. It's more how you talk about people. The idea behind your speech. There's something to be said for, obviously using clean language, knowing when it's appropriate, that sort of thing. But it doesn't necessarily have to be you don't swear all the time. In fact, you go to, I think it's Philippians 3:8, where Paul is in our English translation, it's translated the word rubbish.
Hmm.
That Greek word for rubbish does not mean rubbish.
Sure.
It's a very strong swear word in Greek, and I think this is where you have to be kind of careful sometimes in just making assumptions about your English Bible. That word is very, there's a really heavy argument to be made that Paul says.
Sure.
And, if Paul says shit, okay, he's making a point and he's not using it in a way that's derogatory towards people. He's actually making a theological statement with the emphasis of the word and the severity of
Right.
the word. And thinking through all these points, I think what it comes down to me is the word vulgarity.
Hmm.
So, look, I will swear. I don't mind swearing at all. It doesn't bother me. But I still don't like vulgar comedy.
Hmm.
I still really don't like vulgar TV shows or vulgar music. And
Hmm.
a lot of that has to do with talk of sexual nature,
Hmm.
especially music. So we've talked about, I think we mentioned it briefly somewhere. It's, I'm coaching my son through some of the music he's listening to, which is different than mine. It's fine. But even, going back to that Guns N' Roses story, 80s metal had terrible lyrics about women, right?
Yeah.
And some other genres have terrible lyrics about women that create false expectations, whatever the case may be. But, vulgar jokes that are just inappropriate in their nature, or demeaning because they bring someone down. That's really where I go with that conversation, which I very much avoid because I do not, whether it comes from my faith or somewhere, or me being a peacemaker, anything that gets into that offensive territory really rubs me the wrong way.
And I can see an argument too for the verse, to be kind of all things to all men, or the idea of like.
Hmm.
And so I do want to be mindful of my audience. I just don't want to be flippant with it. But I think also in other circumstances where I kind of know my audience is going to be okay with it. I think you're right. That emphasis on certain things. I mean, obviously, earlier in the podcast, I was, using it as a joke. And I kind of can even find humor in that idea that it's just kind of a word that doesn't, that's all it is. It's just
Hmm.
another word to be used. And in that case, I was using it for the humor side of it. And, I even try and be pretty mindful of that as well. And so, yeah, I do think that audience is a factor for me quite a bit.
Yeah, clearly. And I think, both being professional and polite people, you always have to
Right.
keep it. But going back to that too, I've been to plenty of work parties or wherever where this speech and the content gets vulgar, and I'm like, I'm out of here. I don't need this. I don't want to
Hmm.
hear it. It makes me uncomfortable if somebody's going to talk a certain way about another coworker,
Hmm.
that sort of stuff. And then, the other side of that coin to me would be gossip. That's harder for me to step away from, right?
Hmm.
I want to know sometimes what the gossip is, and I
Right.
want to know what's going on. And maybe I shouldn't. And maybe I need to be a little bit more discerning of, hey, this is not appropriate for me to hear. It's not vulgar, but it's also not fair to the person we're talking about.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good idea. That's an interesting one in a professional context as well because yeah, I work a very boring corporate job and there's a lot of times where we are talking about well, what's going on because you're just trying to even just understand the politics of the office and so then but
Hmm.
then it can so easily veer into that other side really quickly. That's an interesting idea of when it comes to swearing and language that I don't probably think about enough.
Yeah, and so I mean, instead of not saying it, even though Paul says in Scripture, it comes down to vulgarity, gossip, and then the other thing that really changed for me was understanding the idea of taking the Lord's name in vain.
Right.
For a lot of people, that is traditionally, you will not say, "Oh my God," right?
Hmm.
Okay, and I still have a hard time saying that actually.
Yeah.
I would rather say something generic like cripes or something
Right.
stupid, but I still have a hard time saying it, frankly. But again, the more you read, the more you understand that commandment, because that's a big, that's an even bigger emphasis on the commandment part than it, whether it's Paul compared to Paul in the letter, is what does that mean? So I'm going to
Yeah.
ask you, what do you think that means?
Yeah, to me it feels like don't take it seriously, don't hold it in high regard, to be flippant with it would be kind of how I interpret that. Although probably historically I've interpreted it as just don't say it
Hmm.
unless you're talking about his name in a proper sense, which isn't that far off from the other definition I just gave. Now that I think
Sure,
about it.
sure. Yeah, there's some lines crossed, right? You
Yep.
don't. I think flip it is a nice word there. But the way I started to understand it and am convicted by is not saying "Oh my God" or having that expression. Okay, it's more of the are you using God's name to your advantage? Are you using it
Hmm.
to to manipulate people? Are you
Hmm.
using it to make an unfair argument? In vain, you're not taking it seriously. You're using
Hmm.
it for some other purpose. And not to preview other episodes, but you see it a lot in politics now, right? Is people will invoke God's name for various reasons, and I'm not accusing one party of doing that. I think both can. They will use it. They will use God's name for various reasons to invoke emotion, to invoke false convictions, guilt, and money, right?
Right.
I mean, look, we'll probably talk about it on the politics side, but Trump Bible, okay, which
Yeah.
I think I'm quite sure was actually missing part of the Bill of Rights about some things that are actually in the Constitution itself. But like, that's a money grab.
Yeah.
First, no one needs another Bible. Second, why are those two things going to be combined? And so we'll maybe unpack that later. But that's an example to me of taking the Lord's name in vain. Is why don't well, he's got enough money, just give it away for free. Who cares?
Hmm.
So on other things, it happens all over. It just doesn't happen in politics. But not using it in more of an abusive, manipulative situation is what that
Hmm.
commandment's about. And so I don't have any problem if myself or anyone around me does use the expression, oh my God. I don't even know if you're going to bleep it from this episode, but it is something where I fully avoided it before and I just don't know.
That's a funny like idea because like you just said like maybe I'll bleep it, maybe I won't. Why then the choice to bleep it? Like why like we've made that choice. We collectively I think we kind of collectively decided that we are gonna if you listen to some of our episodes, it's come up and we have censored it. We've self-censored ourselves.
Hmm.
Why? Why would we do that then?
I think part of it is knowing the audience too. Like we're not here
Yeah.
to you or I are not here to just poke the bear and make people upset, even though that's fun sometimes, you know. That's really not what we want to do. Want to have a little bit of more of an engaging conversation, and beeping those words is a barrier for people. I'm not saying
Yeah.
that's right or wrong. In fact, if you hold that conviction, I have actually no problem with it. It's just that that can be actually a pretty quick trigger for someone to check out. Plus, if they're listening to this in the car, right, and the kids in there, we don't want to be a negative influence on any kids, so inadvertently
Right.
even. So that is major reason to do some bleeping.
I think it's interesting because I think it was probably mostly me, but I do it because I know one of my kids especially was kind of interested in listening to the episodes. A couple of my kids were, but and then like even in my marriage, my wife is still very much like not on board with it at all. And so like for me it's kind of even like living in that household where I was like, "Oh, well, I want my wife to be able to listen, although she doesn't." Sad face. Um, but I want to be able to have her listen and not feel kind of turned off by it. And even though she watches movies where it happens all the time, she watches TV and movies
Hmm.
where those sorts of words get thrown around, and that doesn't bug her as much. But I think it was one of those things where it was like, okay, I wanted to, just kind of keep it. I'm going to use the phrase family friendly, which I don't even agree with, but just trying to have that in mind as we did this. So
We just got the title card for this episode, Caleb. The title is going to be swearing, and then in parentheses, family friendly.
nice, nice. I contributed to the show.
Finally, God, just doing all the work over here. Well, that kind of leads into what are we comfortable with now? If
Yeah.
Missy doesn't listen, Caleb, fly away. This is a safe space. Just let it off the handle. Just go. Please
Okay.
don't. I'm just kidding. Don't do that.
All right. Let me get out the Jeff Rosenstock
Right.
lyrics. There's one of my favorite artists. Literally, the kids refer to him as the sweary guy because there's no holding back on
Yep.
him. What am I comfortable with now is interesting question. I'm pretty comfortable with whatever, and just in general in life and a lot of things, I'm pretty comfortable with it. I 2020 was a bad year for my mouth. I will just full on say it. It got progressively worse as the year went on, as I got progressively frustrated with things.
Hmm.
I'll just leave it at that. And it was I've been trying kind of like I'd always been kind of okay with it, but then it really 2020 I didn't hold back like in front of my kids really, and in just because I was pissed at a lot of
Hmm.
things in 2020. I was really frustrated, and I it just got out of hand. So I'm okay with it, but like also realized that like I went it was too far, and I've tried to rein it back since then to varying degrees of success. I would say, but it was kind of that weird moment of like, yep, I'm okay with this. I don't have any problem, but also no, this is probably too much, and where is a better balance, which is something I value quite a bit, that idea of
Yeah.
balance. So I'm pretty okay with it, and I don't have great reasons for it. I have a couple thoughts on it. I don't have a ton of theological reasons on why I'm okay with it. But where are you at?
So I'm very much okay with swearing now. I do it sometimes. Oh, I sorry. I just remembered this. One thing going back to the original part at the beginning of this conversation, setting yourself apart, staying clean is I
Hmm.
was so proud of the fact
Mm.
that I was the quote same person to the Christian people I was around as to my secular friends. I thought because my secular friends didn't
Interesting.
hear me swear and I was the same person, quote unquote, that was gonna convert them. Like that was
Hmm.
part of the conversion process. And I bring that up to say that, you know, I want to be the same person kind of obviously throughout, but yeah, in different situations, the language is going to be a little bit different. Somewhat similar to your household, my wife's a little less willing to engage with it, but it's not like we're completely clean over here either.
Right.
I will say that in terms of kids and parenting, we really tried to be clear with my son that he, not use that type of language excessively. Be careful about it with the music, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, I've coached his baseball team for years. The kids are getting into middle school now. Some kids have had phones for 3, 4 years, since they were like 10,
Yeah.
11, and they know and hear stuff far more than we ever did. Far, far, far
Yeah.
more and far earlier. So to them, it may not be as big of a deal.
Hmm.
But, I've had to coach some kids. Quick story. At 11s, one kid was teaching other kids in the dugout what motorboating was. And I was like, oh my goodness, you're 11. And so there's this desire to keep that clean, to keep them safe. Yes, we should have that. And then at the same time, understand that he's seen it all over. He's listening the music he listens to and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I really have no problem with it in general right now. And, we'll use it to its full effect as warranted. Another anecdote about it is, have you ever seen the show Veep?
I haven't.
It was shown on HBO a few years ago. They're over 2020. My wife and I really got into that show. Now, I
Hmm.
just said like 20 minutes ago that I don't like vulgarity. That show is ridiculous. Now, it is super, super, super funny. It is excellent.
Sure.
It is. I think Julia Louis-Dreyfus won like 6 Emmys in a row for her performance as the vice president.
Right.
But look, there is vulgarity, and it's sexual vulgarity and that kind of stuff. But the context is not a threatening context, and maybe that's kind of the other angle of it is
Hmm.
there are comedians that I just won't listen to, and I disapprove of because I think their vulgarity has some aggressiveness to it and a lack of
Hmm.
care for the other person to it. Like this might offend this people group, but I'm going to say it anyway, something like that. Veep is just
Hmm.
straight vulgar jokes the entire time, and it's so well written and executed that we just got into it, and I was like, wow, I can't believe we like this because it's pretty bad.
Right.
It's a NC-17, or well, whatever, R-rated. I don't think it's 17, but it's on HBO.
TV mature.
Yeah,
Is that
TV
what it'd be?
mature. Yep, but only
Yeah.
for language.
Hmm.
So, I find myself enjoying that stuff more, but the context does matter. How much are you threatening somebody else? How much do you care about the topics you're making? I'm a big comedy fan. I've always loved Conan O'Brien, and he's always been a advocate for stand-up comedians. So I'm always
Hmm.
looking for like stand-up comedians. And Jim Gaffigan, I remember seeing Jim Gaffigan and Lewis Black at Acme Comedy Club way, way back in the day before they were big.
Hmm.
And now Jim Gaffigan's starring in Netflix next to Jerry Seinfeld. Like the dude has made it. And
Right.
he's known as a clean comic. Nate Bargatze is known as a clean comic. You know what? They're hilarious. They are so good at what they do. I kind of like that angle of it is you don't need to swear a lot in your stand-up comedy to be funny. And I think
Hmm.
other comics will just use that as their angle. Fine. I just don't find that appealing. But I think that's another angle where I've kind of tried to figure out, hey, is the language important to me or not?
And I think media is a gateway to it, right? I mean, I still remember when late high school we started watching movies that were R rated.
Mm-hmm.
Like it just is there. There's something about that exposure. And I think about one of my favorite TV shows ever is The Wire.
Mm.
And I love The Wire so much because it feels real. Now, it has some fantastical elements, especially season 5, but we're not going to do a media breakdown show because I think only one of us has seen it. But for me, that raw nature of it, like if they didn't say what they said in that TV show, it wouldn't feel as authentic. And I think there's actually a value in watching The Wire, not just for entertainment, but for how it dissects culture and how it
Mm-hmm.
dissects poverty and all of the complicated nature of those issues. It does not paint a black and white picture. It does not say, well, poverty would be solved if A happened. It paints this picture. But if they did that without the raw language within the show, it wouldn't work. It just wouldn't. It
Hmm.
would not be as effective. So there is this weird dynamic for that aspect of it. And I've talked about it before, just artists I like there's a rawness to, Jeff Rosenstock is the guy that we call the sweary guy. I like him because of his raw frustration with culture, and his language seems appropriate to me because it resonates with me in a lot of ways.
Hmm. We've been talking early on about what it means to be set apart, and there's a lot of what our
Mm.
conversation the first episode. And look, it yes, there's an aspect to that that should be true. However, we just this topic included, we never had the counsel of how to like dissect some of this stuff, and maybe we shouldn't. Maybe
Mm.
that's just how you figure out as an adult.
Yeah.
But some stories need to be told in the way that make the education part of it effective. And yeah, they can't be told without some of that language. And yeah, sometimes it might be over the top, but I think you
Yep.
will find, and that I've heard that show is fantastic. I bet I would love it. I think you will find that, in other forms of media, movies, music, the point of it is not is there's an artistic point of it, and that's kind of where it's really
Yeah.
difficult to suss out, what's the artistry from the, overuse, something like that.
Yeah.
So I remember way back in the day, something that I think you had a problem with was a message that was preached was, can a Christian own a Lexus? And that
Yeah.
has nothing to do except to make this example of, I remember when Game of Thrones was out, there were multiple articles about should Christians be watching Game of Thrones. I
Mm.
read Game of Thrones. I watched Game of Thrones. Was it the best show I've ever seen? Not quite. It was pretty good. But talk about vulgarity, brutality, that sort of
Yeah.
thing. Like, kids shouldn't be watching that, of course, but like at some point,
Mm.
the story and the characters are so almost perfect in some ways that enjoying it is, it's part of the journey. And did I like it all the time? No,
Mm.
but there's points at which you can, you should be able to suss out, hey, this is good storytelling versus, what's being used to tell that story. And I just watched a show where I fast forwarded through some parts because I was like, I know what's going to happen. I don't need to watch it. I get the gist of
Mm.
it. So,
Yeah.
it's not like a free for all or anything, but
Yeah.
I think there is discernment in finding out, hey, this artist, this Jeff Rosenstock, I like his music. It's there for a reason. I'm not going to be offended by it. Instead of just blanket, like, nope, nothing.
Yeah. Have you had people come at you and like, hey, you shouldn't be doing that as an adult? Like, you shouldn't be cursing?
Not really. I think most people I'm around now are very, much more mature, open about it. The small group I was in for a while, the guys that were there were not clean. They're Christian
Sure.
dudes, and their jokes were not clean, and they're still not sometimes. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. So, I don't really have people in my life right now who are like, don't use that language. I don't swear all the time anyway, so it's not like people like, hey, you got to tone it down, pal. There are kids
Right.
who could be around. So, no, I don't really have people who have said it's too much or stop.
Okay. My parents were frustrated with me at times with like, oh, you shouldn't say that in front of your
Hmm.
kids. I was kind of like, well, my kids doing what I want.
You get to,
You volunteering to raise them? No, I'm
yeah.
doing it.
No, it's just this whole thing, maybe there's an aspect to that that's effective and authentic in a way. So you remember the movies like Ernest Goes to Jail and Ernest Goes to Camp?
I do remember those movies, although I don't know if I've ever
Yeah,
seen
I
them.
I I'm sure I saw them. I just, I don't even remember a plot line or whatever. I just remember at some point as, a pretty young kid, probably 9 or 10 or something, like watching outtakes, and the actor who played Earl would like
Hmm.
swear, and I was like, oh no, like because all those movies are entirely clean. They're just slapstick, stupid humor,
Right.
and then the actor is like, you think it's safe, and then it's not. And so
Yeah.
I don't think there's a as long as you're able to talk to your kids about it and be forthright, there are some of Simon's friends who use the F word a lot, and I'm like,
Hmm.
I was on the baseball field just yesterday morning, and these 13-year-olds are swearing at each other, pretty aggressively. And that's kind of when
Hmm.
it starts. I understand that, but like to the degree to which it's just let loose versus how much are you parenting through it, I think that's an effective conversation to have with kids. Well, simply as opposed to not avoiding it.
Sure. Because our kids are homeschooled, there's a little more isolation. The majority of the swearing they've been introduced to has come from their father. That guy's a jerk. Uh,
He's an asshole.
but so we, that guy's the worst. We have instituted, like, I have talked to my kids about it. Like, yeah, you know what's out there. We've seen enough TV where it's there. We've watched the Marvel movies, and there's nothing crazy out of hand in those. But
Hmm.
like, but we have laid it down partially because I've just been like, look, your mom doesn't like it, and your dad's trying to be better. So no, when you're 18, you can make your own decisions.
Yeah.
In our house right now, we want you to try and avoid it, and it's not the end of the world if it happens, but
Hmm.
it's just we're not going to do that. And when you're 18, you can make your own decisions about what you want to do, and but your mom doesn't like it, so yeah, we're not going to do it for now. So
I just think pulling it back to the faith conversation, it's like, what's the utility of being ultra strict about it? The message is,
yeah,
again, is like the people who do this aren't taking faith seriously, and or it's something it's a sin they have to work on, that sort of stuff. And maybe that part is or isn't true, but also it'll get a little more deep. Maybe it's a sign of something else going on, right?
yeah,
Like let's maybe talk instead of being like that person should do it. Maybe the conversation is, hey, maybe that person's going through something. We should pray for them. We should help them out. That sort of thing.
hmm.
So, yeah, I don't fully understand the utility of being, just like cutting it off completely and then having a child step into the real world at 18 and then having them hear it all at once and being like, oh, I didn't know.
Yeah.
So, there again, being intentional about counseling our kids through some of that stuff goes a long way. Any other thoughts on this stupid ass episode that we just put together?
Fuck no.
Good for you.
I don't know if I'll include that one.
Yeah.
That one too many.
We're gonna get an E on Spotify next to the name.
If I miss them all, yeah, I'll see
Yeah,
how many
right.
I can cover up.
Yikes. So I think we've covered this topic rather thoroughly. Maybe something else will come up, but I don't know how many swears you'll have to edit out. It's a little less than I thought there would be. So good on us for holding back. Good on us
Yeah,
for controlling our tongues.
yeah. It'll be it was a all over the place conversation. I will be interested to re-listen to this in general, just to feel like where were we? Because I feel like we've gone all over the place. And yeah, we'll see if I miss any when I send it off for proofing.
It'll be like people who really love this episode, which is exactly zero people, will be like, "Where's the Easter egg? Caleb's gonna leave in a swear somewhere, so I gotta listen for it."
I mean, you get to decide if it's explicit or not on Spotify. So, we could just say no and then sneak one in right at the end.
That would be dishonest of you.
Oh,
Yeah.
well,
So
I'll
we'll
try.
work on
I'll
that.
try and
I'll
avoid
pray.
it.
I'll pray for you.
Good, good.
Anyway, thank you for joining me, and everyone out there, thank you for listening. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks for listening to this episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope you were able to have a little fun with us as we goofed around a little bit and talked about a topic we took seriously but also had a little fun with. I'd also like to apologize if there was any kind of loud noises throughout the episode. There was a lot of noise going on in my house during recording, and I know some of it showed up and is maybe even still showing up now, so I apologize for that as well. Let us know what you thought about this show or any of our other shows. If you want to chime in on the topic of foul language, feel free. If you want to follow the show on Twitter, our handle is @SurvivedYG, and you can also email us at ISurvivedYouthGroup@gmail.com. If you're interested in being on the show, drop us a line. We'd love to connect with you and have you on the show if you want to share your youth group experiences, whether you participated in the youth group we went to or a different youth group entirely. We'd love to hear from you. Please subscribe and share the podcast. If you're so inclined, leave a rating or review. If you enjoy this show, you might also enjoy the other podcast I do. It's a music podcast called the Album Anniversary Podcast. Over the last couple of years, I've researched and documented the release dates of thousands of albums, and then throughout the week, I post about them on social media. We've had a couple different formats on the show, but it's a chance to take some time and talk about some of the music I've documented on my calendar. I try and get a guest in occasionally just to talk about the albums more, but it's just a fun music conversation show. Once again, that is the Album Anniversary Podcast. The music at the beginning and the end of this show is the instrumental version of the song Positive Charge by the artist Dread Pirate Roberts. Thanks again, and we will talk to you soon. Let me know when you're ready.
All right, let's do it.